I'm gonna give you kind of like a walking tour, more or less, of the fort. I'm gonna walk on top of the ramparts, videotape the lake and the surrounding area, and then I will exit the fort and show you I guess, more or less what it would have looked like. So, if I can, I will try to stop by Fort Oswego and Montcalm Park. I'm not sure about the parking. I might have to park on the street. Not overly comfortable with, but if I have to, and if I can, I will try to do that. To give you an idea of what Fort Oswego would have, the area around Fort Oswego, what that would have looked like. And I'll even, if I can, go inside the casements to show you the gun ports and the arrows. Or the interior of the fort. That's the word I'm looking for. So again, the French would have landed about a mile or so that way, established themselves on what is now St. Paul's Cemetery, and then traveled down that road, and then formed their battle lines roughly about where the baseball fields are. Right about there. Oh, and like I mentioned, I will go down to the baseball fields and kind of give you an idea of what the French vantage point would have looked like around 1756 or so. And give you an idea as to why they established themselves by, or where the modern baseball fields are, versus somewhere else. Here we have a penthouse or a large cannon. I won't read that, but you can pause here and read it yourself. Seems like it's a point of Bastion A is a reproduction of a smoothbore US model 1839 18-pounder siege gun, covered by a penthouse or a wooden structure designed to be taken apart quickly in case of an attack. This reconstruction is the only example of what was once a common structure at U.S. coastal fortifications, where wind-driven rain, snow, dirt, and salt water quickly damaged exposed gun cartridges. White-hot cannonballs weighing 18 pounds would be fired at wooden enemy ships and skip along the surface of the water until they found their mark. The advent of rifled cannon and armored ships during the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, rendered these cannons obsolete. 18 of these guns were on top of the ramparts in the 1840s and 1850s, and the last was removed in 1867. Notice on the terraced ground to the right and left of the semicircular outlines of traverse circles for other guns. An 1850 newspaper account described an open house during which local women were allowed to pull the lanyard, firing the cannon at floating targets in the lake. So here you can see what they're talking about. Here's the replica of the cannon, and then they would have been fired at objects, most likely ships, attacking from the lake out here. Sometimes they would even purposely shoot the cannon towards the ground, or the water rather, so that they would skip across and do damage to the ships more or less towards the water line, versus trying to aim for the mast and destroy the rigging of the ship, which is a lot more difficult because the masts are so much thinner than the actual hull of the ship. So right here is an entrance to a casement, so I'm going to enter very carefully. So this is an example of a casement. Obviously it's just kind of like a large cellar. It's underground, so it's well protected, and you of course have these gun ports here, which what's the word I'm looking for? The defenders could shoot from. And again, right over here in this area would have been where the original entrance was in 1756. Some of the casements are very different, like for example the one across the way there is a lot larger than this one. This one is just kind of like a underground hallway, more or less. But essentially it'd be the same thing. Arched ceilings and arches to give it added support, and then of course the gun ports that the defenders could shoot from on an attacking army. Obviously you would not want to get stuck down here because doing so would be very difficult to get out of and quite the challenge for any defender, especially if you are overwhelmed and your army is resource depleted. I believe this casement is going to be roughly the same. I will go down just to make sure, but I think again, it's just going to be roughly a glorified hallway with some gun ports for the defenders to shoot from. Yeah. More or less the same. Right over there is where we just were. You can see through the gun port. Right about there is where we were. And this is basically the same. Glorified hallway with gun ports and arched ceilings. This casement over here, however, you can tell is a lot wider than that one right there. Must be 4 o'clock. Church bell's rung. But this casement over here is a lot wider and rather a little bit different than the other ones. So if we go down slowly. I mentioned that it's 4 o'clock because this closes at 4:30, so I got a half hour. This is the description of what a not a casement, a casemate is. This and 4 other stone casemates are large chambers beneath the ramparts designed as gun emplacements were constructed during and following the Civil War, again 1861 to 1865. And here, these are the casemates near the main entrance, which is just over there, and there's that boulder with the plaque detailing what the fort, a little history of the fort. There's the stairway we came up, and then over here there's more. So, going out that way, fire, and through here, more gun ports, and then this little room here, which I believe may have been where they stored the ammo, because as you can tell, there are no gun ports along the wall. So, and then there was this large door here that I imagine was placed on the outside of this archway, right about here. Yep, we have the bolt holes right there, which would make it very bad decision to kind of defend this area, because if you were stuck in here, you would have nowhere to go. So this, I believe, was where they stored the ammo, and then they used this door. They had somebody inside, and then through the little slit in the door, they passed the ammo down the line to the rest of the soldiers in the casemate. Or they used it as a prison, but there is a secondary prison in the fort, so I do not believe that that was a prison, but rather where they stored the ammunition. In the 18th century, those would have not been there. Instead, they're more of a 19th century addition to fortifications in general. In the 18th century, you mainly just had the ramparts here and then a wall on top. There was no, as far as I know, there were no interior casemates, as we call them today. There was nothing like that, unless it was for a garrison. But it would be kind of dangerous to house soldiers during a war inside the brick walls that were being shot at with cannon by the attacking army. So these casemates are more, as far as I know, a 19th century addition to fortifications, or 19th century development to fortifications. There's another one. That one is closed. And of course you have the rampart there. And over here is where we first started. Actually right down there. Okay. I'm gonna walk a little bit this way and give you an interior look of the fort. This little stone building here was a powder house, which is where they stored the ammunition. Again, the officers' quarters, one of them. Then the second officer's quarters over here. soldiers' mess, and what's the word I'm looking for? And garrison, I believe. And then little stone. I want to make a correction actually. That little stone building right there, that stone square, was where the guard house was. That's where the guard lived and slept. That little wooden box right there with the sloped roof was the guard house, where the guard would establish himself to protect the fort if needed. And then inside that stone building, there is a small prison. So I do not believe that the little area we saw inside the casemate with the big door and the lack of gun ports was a prison, but rather a spot for ammunition, because there is a prison inside that small building there. So again, this is Fort Ontario on Lake Ontario in Oswego, New York. Relatively inexpensive to get into. You have the lake, great views of the lake. A lot of history in it. It was attacked and re-attacked and recaptured and captured several times throughout history. In the early stages, it was a British post, but then in 1756 it was attacked by the French and captured by the French. Then in 1759, the British recaptured it. War of 1812, the Americans took it. Then British took, or no, I'm sorry. Yeah, the Americans took it, and the British took it back and burned it, and then eventually it was given back to the United States after the War of 1812. Some of those dates and events might be a little iffy, but that just gives you an idea of the, more or less, the importance of this fortification. This is on a good cliffside, very good position for a fortification, and right on the mouth of Onondaga River, where it enters into Ontario Lake, or Lake Ontario. Right across the way in Canada, roughly about towards where the St. Lawrence River is Fort Frontenac in Kingston, I believe, in Kingston, Canada, or Kingston, Ontario, Canada, and Oswego, or Fort Ontario, in 1760 or 1759, was used by the British as a base for their attack on Fort Frontenac in Canada. And then again in 1760, Jeffrey Amherst, wait, let me double check my dates. Excuse me a minute. Yeah, in 1759, the British used it to attack, as a base to attack, Fort Niagara, which again is down that way. Then again in August 1759, the British used the fort. Nope. In 1759, the fort was added to by British General Thomas Gage, and he made it stronger, more or less what we saw in the 1759-1760 picture that I showed you earlier. And then in the summer of 1760, the British used the fort as a base for their 11,000 strong army to attack Montreal, which would be down that way, now facing the St. Lawrence, which would be many hundred miles north of here. So Fort Ontario was in a perfect position to establish a base for not only attacks down the New York coast, but attacks into Canada. Right across the way is Kingston, and then it's just a boat ride away, more or less, to the St. Lawrence River Valley and the access to Montreal and the interior area, more or less, of Canada, and their main cities in the 18th century. And their main cities now. Alright. So I'm gonna walk myself again over there. I'm gonna head out because I think they're starting to close. And you have the lake. And then over here, I forgot to mention, this is a reconstruction, or rather maybe even a reproduction or an authentic 19th century cannon that they would have had established on top excuse me, of the fort in the 19th century, maybe even during the American Civil War and the Patriot War that occurred earlier in that century. And down there again, in the 18th century is where the French established a battery or cannon against Fort George over where the port is now, where those four what look to be water towers are. I'm gonna make my way down here, because again I think they're starting to close up, and that'll do it for this series of videos on Fort Ontario in northern New York during the French and Indian War. So from here on out, I'm done talking for a little bit, and I'm gonna record myself exiting the fort. This is a storehouse, this big building here. Storehouse. Guardhouse. Little jail inside the back. And bunkers.
Good thing there wasn't baseball back when our period was.
Thank you. Yep. And there we have Fort Ontario.